Now, unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I actually do have to get to bed by a certain point because it's October, and therefore my schedule is just going to get busier as the winter rolls on. So there is at least one story that I want to cover because it has been bugging me all week, and I really just want to talk with Romney and Alex about it. Okay? So I played Metroid Dread. I'm just going to go ahead and say this. I want to say I'm about 80% through the game. I have not finished it, and it's mainly because Romney probably understands my pain here. When you get power bombs, it's usually at the end of the game, and they usually give you like one or two, and I'm always like, fuck that shit. And I immediately go back and try and find some power bomb tanks. So that's what I'm doing, and I've actually irritated my family. He's like, we expected you to be done by now. And I'm like, no, I don't have time.
Yeah, the struggle is real with Metroid games. I mean, it's by design. You get the item, you go back to parts of the game you couldn't get to before. That's literally the design.
Exactly. And at that point, like, I'm going to be playing this like 30 plus runs, so it doesn't matter to me. If I have to go through some busy season, then on the weekend I can just look forward to Metroid. Kind of like what I did with Samus Returns. And ultimately, this article got referred to me by a listener. And just, I don't know how many times I've hit my head against a wall trying to understand why this person is a gaming reviewer for Mashable. Because the review that we're looking into is basically, let me give you the headline. Metroid Dread is a thrilling twist on a classic, but it made me miserable. And just to kind of sum up the article for you guys, because it's full of a lot of gobbledygook that I think, in all honesty, he could have worded better. But basically what he wants to do, like with most games that come out and are to some degree hard, is try to get up on a soapbox and immediately demand mandatory easy modes for games because they're immediately going to compare it to Dark Souls. I'm literally not kidding, guys. I am so sick of reviewers, of games journalists for these outlets immediately going to Dark Souls of all things to prove why Resident Evil Village is hard, or Metroid Dread is hard, or why or what's another, or why Animal Crossing is hard. Like,
Animal Crossing's hard.
That hasn't happened, but I'm saying, like, guys,
It will.
Give it time.
It will.
Yes. I'm pretty sure at some point after the Stardew Valley Cup, somebody will say that Stardew Valley is as hard as Dark Souls. Okay? Here's why I have a major problem with this, is because your comparison is a chasm apart. Like, okay, Nintendo has had a philosophy with every single one of their games, which I think has why they've endured as long as they have, especially to the casual audience. They literally have the philosophy of easy to pick up, difficult to master. Okay? And that's where all of their games have gone into, is that anybody can pick up a Mario game. Anybody can pick up a Zelda game. But if you want to get really good at it, that's where the difficulty comes into play. Okay? Metroid is no different in this regard. And Romney's agreeing with me because it's true. It is an easy enough concept to be able to pick up, but if you want to be a master, if you want to be one of those epic speedrunners that you see on the YouTubes, you've got to put the time in, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think one of the major contributing factors to this, and this has been a problem with gaming reviews in general, is that notion that game reviewers have to rush through all the way to the end of the game in order to make deadline. And honestly, that's just not feasible with certain games. There are some games you just can't rush through, and lest we
disconnect with the reviewers and with the outlets, because the outlets just immediately assume everything is World of Warcraft, everything is Stardew Valley. You can literally pick it up and learn its learning curve in minutes, And that's not the case. A lot of games have nuance to them. A lot of games have things that you additionally have to learn. Metroid is one of those cases where they are throwing new mechanics at you quite a bit of the time. Because if it's your first run, you might not necessarily know how missiles work. You might not necessarily know how the morph ball works. Kind of thing. And they just go, well, we're just assuming that you know how to play Metroid. When this person probably has, I'm guaranteeing you, has never played a Metroid game. Because he wouldn't be making this comparison.
Nope, and I think, and this is something that we really need to consider. I would argue that we need to change the way game reviews are produced because, again, it's not a Cecil. That's why I think we ought to go through a model where we have kind of the two-tiered review, where we have, okay, we first have the first impressions, where it's like, okay, here's our impressions after playing, say, 10 hours with this game.
Yeah.
And then doing a later review being like, okay, here's what we thought after we went back and finished it. Because I know that that's something that game reviewing outlets used to do in the past because of the fact that some of these games take a really, really long time to get through, even when you're given advance copies.
Exactly. The one outlet right now that I'm going to give the props to is IGN, because they've still established the review in progress concept, where they're putting out an article with their initial thoughts, and they basically make it open edit to the journalist, and at some point when they finish the game and when they're done and they feel like they make a comprehensive review, they put it up as final review kind of thing. Not every journalist at IGN does this. In fact, I can already tell you it's maybe one or two people, and I always read the ones that are from those one or two people because they do that in progress, and that's what I care about. Like you're going the extra mile instead of just racing through the game and then going, it sucks, it's great, it sucks. And usually that's motivated by how much money or how many review copies that they give you kind of thing. And in this case, the other thing that I also want to point out here is, again, easy to pick up, difficult to master. Dark Souls is not built that way. Miyazaki has gone on the record numerous times in interviews saying, I get that people want easy modes to Dark Souls, but that takes a piece of my vision away from it. He literally builds this with Souls fans in mind. And that's why he has the audience that he has. Because there's still a hardcore contingent of his audience that loves Dark Souls 2 for the sheer amount of difficulty that offered. Okay? And, they'll still continue to beg, please make a game that's just as hard as Dark Souls 2. But if Miyazaki puts out a game, like all the others, they are coming to go play it. Kind of thing. Because who knows, maybe this will be the one that does it. And that's why I'm saying, you have a game that is made for casuals to be able to pick up, but has enough depth to be able to master it and be able to give something for hours and hours of gameplay. Dark Souls has that, but it starts off at a really high curve. And it assumes you are there. You can't compare this. This is apples to oranges. How can you compare Zelda to Dark Souls?
Yeah. Plus another point, and one argument that I have seen in favor of the easy mode in Dark Souls, and at least that's an argument that I've made and I've seen a few other people make, where if it's a game where the story is a key part of it, where you're trying to tell a story, there's a case where, okay, you need an easy mode, so that way the full story is available to a player. Resident Evil Village does this very well, where they have casual mode being like, hey, if you only care about the story and don't want to deal with some of the harder elements, play on this mode, you get the full story. Mm-hmm. Whereas if story is not the main focus of the game, having those tiered difficulties is part of it. With Metroid, it's kind of in that weird nebulous era of, well, you still get the full story, and the only thing that really determines your rewards is not really whether you're doing this on easy or hard mode. It's like, okay, how much of the map are you able to explore in how much time? And that's what determines what you get at the end, but you still get the core story. You still get the core experience, regardless of how you play the game.
Yeah. The other thing that I'll also bring up from this article that they also try to do as kind of an extension of the argument, and I've seen other articles do this too. Yeah, this wasn't the only one. This was irritating to me. Is that they try to also compare the melee counter in Metroid to the backstab in Dark Souls. Again, stop comparing these two. There's a lot more involved with getting a backstab than there is with a melee counter in Metroid Dread. Okay? Same thing with Metroid Samus Returns. I got the melee counter right off the bat. I don't know about you, Romney. I got it right off the bat. It took me a while to master backstabbing. Okay? It's not that easy. And it's not meant to be. And so please stop comparing. Like, I get it. You want a mandatory casual mode for every single game that you play. You want to be able to basically drool your way through a game story so that you can then do your snide, snarky review. I get it. But this is why I have the argument that I do, which is let the developer be able to follow the creative vision they want to follow. And if that means that it's insanely hard, then it means it's insanely hard.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
And at the same time, outlets also need to be more mindful of, hey, reviewing a game is not like reviewing a book or reviewing a movie. These things take time, but you also want to make sure you've got the right person who can actually give it a fair assessment. I mean, a good example, back at the Globe, prior to Aldo being brought onto the paper to review games, I tried doing a game review, and honestly, it's pretty much the case of when you're trying to think of an audience that would enjoy a particular game. All right, a better example, using movies as an example, if I'm reviewing a family film that's like an animated kids movie, I'm not going to judge it by the same criteria that I would judge a slasher film for, because those are two different audiences. Those are films that are trying two different things. It's not fair to compare, say, Puss in Boots with the Rob Zombie Halloween. I mean, the audience, there is no audience overlap for that unless you've got some really messed up individuals.
Silly, but that's what this critic is doing. Is these literally trying to say, okay, this really namby-pamby kids game is this super dark. Like, you're doing that kind of a broad comparison, and it just falls flat. That's why, like, I'm actually kind of glad that you kind of pointed this out, is, when the Globe would bring people in, they would actually say, like, okay, what's your expertise? Like, what do you know the most about? And so at that point, then if they said, well, video games I know a lot about, then they could say, well, we have a video game reviewer. And I actually liked how, I can't remember her name, but how she handled it. It was like, okay, what else can you bring to video games, or is there something else that you can cover? And one of the people that was in my class was like, oh, I can cover fashion, because I follow the fashion world probably a little bit more than I do video games. Outlets today are basically saying, and I know this for a fact, not with this particular author, but some of the other articles that came out. Guess what they were reviewing before they did video games? Books, specifically political autobiographies. You know nothing about what you're talking about, okay? I know more about this game than you do, and you know more about Barack Obama than I know, okay? Like, that, there's just no ifs, ands, or buts around it, and that's the way that it is. I am a fan of Metroid, but I'm also a fan of the company Mercury Steam that made it. And so at that point, I can tell you the nuance that was put into this game from Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate, which is where they kind of learned how to do their Metroidvania formula and then applied it to Samus Returns. I'm the guy who should be doing this because I can make that proper comparison. And the other one that I also love that they try to bring in here as a comparison to get their way, Hollow Knight. God, that's even worse. It's a Metroidvania that's designed to be a Dark Souls game.
Yeah. I mean, another fundamental problem is that when you have a reviewer who's not used to reviewing games, and this is something that I've run into when I've tried reviewing games on my channel, and even when I try to review certain movies, nobody really thinks in terms of asking the basic question is this worth the money that is being charged for it?
Yes.
They just think, oh, I need to give like this opinion of it being good or bad, but they never really think to ask that simple question of, okay, I've played this game. Is this game worth the $50 that I'm being charged for? They lose the plot. They get too caught up in trying to make some sort of meta-narrative commentary that they think that they lose sight of what the point of a review is, which is this a product worth buying?
Exactly. I mean, like, you kind of brought up the Globe. When I came in and was doing reviews, I remember her saying, well, we've already got Aldo doing video game reviews. But what I basically argued to them, because at that time, all the stuff that he had been doing was Pokken Tournament. I think he had just barely put out one for Pokemon X and Y. And so at that point, he was covering mainly mainstream games. And he was still kind of doing the budget review kind of thing. And that was totally fine. But I'm like, well, here's the thing. I'm not necessarily doing mainstream games right now. I'm playing a lot of indie games. And so that was my edge that I brought in, and therefore we could be game reviewers at the same time, because I was basically taking a different approach and saying, is this indie game worth the budget, like worth the money as a budget title that it's saying that it is?
Yeah,
and so
that was
I wasn't honing in on Aldo's turf, and he wasn't honing in on mine.
Yeah, and that was pretty much how it started when I first started as a critic at the Globe, was that we had another critic at the paper who was pretty much doing a lot of the mainstream stuff. And so when I pitched it to them, I figured, okay, well, I noticed we have a lot of parents who come to the college, and naturally they're going to want to figure out, okay, is this family movie coming out worth taking my kids to? And I figured, okay, that was my edge, was starting with family films, being like, okay, I'm going to approach this and review these films as though I'm thinking, would I recommend this to a parent coming to the college trying to decide whether or not they want to take their kid to this new family movie? And that was how I approached it.
Yeah. So just to kind of wrap this thing up and also kind of go into Alex's thoughts on this, but look, I get that you want your mandatory casual modes. Please stop making the please stop going from David to Goliath, so to speak. Like, stop using the comparison of a simplistic game being just as hard as the super duper hard game that is made to be hard, that is going to punish you for not acclimating to it. Nintendo punishes you, but it's very lightly. Okay? There's a very clear line here, and this just makes your soapbox fall apart, in my opinion, because all it takes is somebody like me to come out and say how stupid your argument is. But also, please, outlets, look into what these people are writing. Because if they don't know what they're talking about, they're not going to resonate with the audience that you're trying to bring them into. And in fact, you will then get all of the Twitter haters that basically come in and say, because here's the thing, yes, Twitter haters exist and they are extreme, but then in the middle of all of that, you have constructive criticism. And that constructive criticism gets labeled as Twitter hate. Except he or she is right. So
yeah, and it's fundamentally, it's just make sure you're hiring the right type of reviewer for the right type of content you're wanting to cover. I mean, it's like hiring any sort of beat reporter. If you're gonna have someone write sports, make sure that there's someone who knows about sports and understands the sports that they are covering. You're not gonna have a film critic try to cover, for example, trying to cover an MMA match unless they've established, hey, I understand the sport and can accurately describe it. A better example would be, you're not going to have, say, a meteorologist cover a basketball game unless they've proven, hey, we understand the sport and can actually explain it. It's very much right. Get the right person for the job.
Exactly. And I get it. Not a lot of people are applying for that position. Then at that point, close the position. Because, don't try to just shoehorn somebody into that doesn't know what the F they're talking about, because you will get called out for it, and then you lose even more reputation than you would have lost if you had just closed the position and said, we're not covering video games anymore.
Yeah, and alternately, if you want to close the position, there's a bunch of freelance writers who already know how to do this that would be more than willing to even work on a short-term contract basis.
And just because I know that a few people in our audience will actually do this, no! Mashable can't pay me enough. Besides, I do it on my own anyway. I do it on my own and show that I don't have to work with an outlet to be able to do it. Alex, your thoughts on this situation as kind of a wrap-up. Have I made my case here? Am I smoking crack? What?
No, I think you both hit the nail on the head here. You're perfectly right. It is. Everybody seems to go to Dark Souls as this weird comparison to what's hard. Just out of curiosity, I decided to go to GameFAQs and look up this game, because GameFAQs has like a scale of 1 to 4 or 5 about how hard a game is. this Metroid comes in about 3.57, so
Yeah.
sounds like it is reasonably difficult,
It's
but
in the middle. I can already tell you one thing that does make it difficult, and I had this argument for a while. If you have not played Samus Returns, this game will be hard to you. Or if you played Samus Returns and you never got used to the aiming mechanic or the melee counter, you will have issues with Metroid Dread. Because Mercury Steam really integrated that stuff into the boss fights, into the exploration, and you do need to know those. Like, the biggest argument that I've had from people is that a lot of my friends are somewhat older, and therefore they started to deal with things like arthritis. And so the melee counter is kind of hard for them to do because their hands are hurting. And at that point, I feel for them, but that's the way that Mercury Steam designed the game. That's what makes it difficult. I've died on bosses. Everybody does. But it's just like any other Metroid game. Learn the pattern, and then you're golden, kind of thing. And then that pattern now involves aiming system and melee counters. So, that being said, we do kind of need to wrap things up.